When my kids were little, they spent a lot of time in school reading fun books and listening to their teachers read books out loud. In most elementary schools nowadays, kids are spending the majority of their reading time memorizing phonics rules and practicing word skills. Not only is this approach more boring for kids, research actually shows that it's not effective. We need to wake up to what's going on in our schools and demand a change. Kids learn best when they're genuinely interested in what they're learning, when it's something that piques their curiosity. Of course, different kids are intrigued by different things, so kids need some choices in order to explore their interests and seek out what resonates with them. In classrooms where learning feels interesting and meaningful to kids, and where they can make some of their own choices about what they're learning, kids tend to be a lot more engaged and self-motivated. This idea that learning should be meaningful and engaging to kids stands in contrast to the idea that children's brains are like empty buckets, passively waiting to be filled by teachers. And a teacher's job is to insert a collection of meaningless and disconnected bits of information into kids' heads. Fortunately, many schools are recognizing the importance of active, engaged, and meaningful learning. However, when it comes to reading instruction, administrators in many of these same schools are telling teachers to fill kids' heads with a laundry list of rules and have kids practice meaningless skills over and over. How is it that kids' reading time has become so consumed with memorizing rules and practicing skills? The commonly held theory these days is that the way to get kids to be good readers is to break down the process of reading into different isolatable skills. The skills related to sounding out words are separated from those related to understanding the meaning of what you're reading. What you hear often is that kids must first learn how to read by mastering their sounding out skills, and then their mental energy will be freed up to think about what they're reading by focusing on the meaning of the words in front of them. So kids' early reading instruction is centered around letters, sounds, and individual words, rather than reading books. It's often not until 3rd or 4th grade that instruction shifts from a focus on sounding out skills or decoding to a focus on meaning. Here are some of the activities that kids are doing to practice their sounding out skills. They listen to words spoken out loud and then break each word down into its component sounds. For example, the word box is made up of 4 sounds: b, a, k, s. Kids work on memorizing the connection between letters and sounds by doing phonics flashcards and reading lists of nonsense words out loud. They're also reading what's called decodable texts, short stories that are designed to give kids practice reading words that follow specific phonics rules. For example, one is filled with words that use the letters E and EA to make the eh sound. It's about 2 people, Jen and Ted, who like bread. But Ted dreads baking bread, so he read while Jen baked the bread. And as she baked, she got sweat on her head. After reading a decodable text, kids often do various phonics activities related to the words in the story and the sounds and letters that make up those words. Kids also practice sounding out words as quickly and accurately as possible. In one common exercise, the students work in pairs. The teacher sets a timer, and while one student reads a passage out loud, the other student keeps track of how many words their partner gets wrong and how many seconds it takes them to read through the essay. Each student reads the same passage numerous times, trying to improve their speed and accuracy with each repeated reading. It is these type of skills which supposedly make up the first pieces of the reading puzzle. The idea is that once kids have mastered all of the sounding out skills, they can put them together and bingo. They'll know how to read and they'll be motivated to read a lot. But there are some major problems with this theory. For one thing, when reading instruction for years is filled with so many meaningless and dull activities, kids, to no surprise, often come to believe that reading is meaningless and dull. They don't feel particularly inspired to read books, even if they can get great scores on decoding tests. Also, you have to wonder if memorizing phonics rules is really the best way to learn to read in English when the connection between letters and sounds in our language is extremely complicated. For example, the sound can be made by at least 6 different letter combinations. And here's a rule that kids are supposed to memorize about how to pronounce the letters ed at the end of a word. Ed will say d if the last sound of the base word is voiced. Ed will say t if the last sound of the base word is unvoiced. Ed will say id if the last sound of the base word is t or d. Do we really want our kids spending their time trying to memorize these kinds of rules? Others argue that if we want young kids to be motivated to become good readers, they need to experience how interesting and meaningful reading can be. They need to see reading as the key to a world of fun books that they can choose from. not as a series of uninteresting skills that their teacher says they must learn. Since the fundamental purpose of reading is to find meaning, it makes no sense to remove meaning from reading instruction. Reading for meaning needs to be at the center of instruction from the very start. Rather than breaking reading down into different skills and teaching each skill in isolation, proponents of the reading for meaning approach argue that reading is a complex process that can't be broken down into separate pieces. The whole of reading is much greater than the sum of its parts. And it is through the process of reading, with adults and independently, that kids gradually pick up the knowledge and skills they need in order to become better and better readers. As kids read, they subconsciously acquire an understanding of complex phonics rules and spelling patterns, the meaning of new vocabulary words. For example, kids learn how to read the words licked, pulled, and fainted, not by memorizing the rule about ed endings, but through their repeated language experiences, including reading fun books. With the reading for meaning approach, kids spend the majority of their literacy time reading, discussing, and listening to books. Teachers read books out loud to their students, teachers read books with students, and kids read books on their own, with guidance and support from the teacher. It's through their engagement with books that kids develop their ability to understand and enjoy increasingly complex material. Teachers can still give some explicit lessons about phonics rules or spelling patterns, but they do it within the context of a book they're reading. Of course, when kids are completely new to reading, teachers have to teach some very basic skills. Kids need to know the letters of the alphabet and some simple letter-sound correspondences. Kids typically master this knowledge by the end of kindergarten, if not earlier. They do not need to wait until 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade to begin exploring rich, meaningful stories. The reading for meaning approach is not just about giving kids time to pick out and read books. It can also include training teachers how to monitor students' independent reading and how to help students learn to monitor their own reading. A carefully developed classroom culture in which students feel confident of themselves as readers, no matter what level books they're reading, and inspired to want to read. And systems for students to define and monitor their individual reading goals. If you ask proponents of the skills-based approach for research that supports their position, most will point to the report of the National Reading Panel, or NRP, which was published in the year 2000. Or they'll point to other research which in turn relies on the NRP. It's continuously referred to as the indisputable proof that systematic phonics is the most effective way to teach reading kindergarten through 6th grade. President Bush based the No Child Left Behind Act on the findings of this report. However, if you actually read it, you'll find that the data does not present strong evidence in support of phonics instruction. The NRP report and the way it's been represented have been guided more by politics than objectivity. Many of the findings actually call into question the effectiveness of phonics instruction. The report itself states that phonics instruction failed to exert a significant impact on the reading performance of low-achieving readers in 2nd through 6th grade, and that phonics should not become the dominant component in a reading program, neither in the amount of time devoted to it nor in the significance attached. Also, students with limited English proficiency were excluded from the NRP's analysis on phonics. According to the report, if teachers have students who are learning English as a second language, they need to realize that such children are likely to be confused by instruction in phonics and phonemic awareness. Another fundamental flaw with the NRP report, and this is a common problem with reading research, is that most of the studies measured students' progress on a specific skill, not their progress in terms of reading comprehension. In fact, often kids who learn an isolated skill cannot transfer that skill to actually reading and understanding texts. Even this major study by the U.S. Department of Education concluded that giving kids intensive decoding training improved their scores on decoding tests, but it did not significantly impact their ability to understand what they were reading. There was only one person on the NRP panel who actually spent her career in the elementary schools, and she disagreed with the final conclusions of the rest of the panel. Given these facts about the NRP report, it's way past time to recognize that the NRP emperor is actually wearing no clothes. This report does not prove that teaching isolated skills is more effective than having kids read books. There is one finding that almost all researchers agree upon. The highest achieving readers are the kids who do the most reading. Of course, when two things are correlated, it does not necessarily mean that one causes the other. But there are also plenty of controlled studies that confirm what common sense already tells us. When kids read lots of books, it helps them become better readers. And if teachers can inspire kids to want to read, not just in class, but during the evenings and weekends and summer vacation, that could have a huge impact on their reading growth. Here are some questions you could be asking of your local school. How much time do kids have each day to read a book of their own choosing? Do kids have access every day to a wide selection of fun books? Do teachers have time each day to provide guidance to kids in their independent reading? Do teachers get training on how to best encourage and support students' reading? How much time is designated each day for teachers to read fun books out loud to their class? And are kids in the school developing a love of reading? Schools often celebrate the idea of reading, or claim to be taking a balanced approach, at the same time that they provide little or no time in the daily schedule for actually reading books. Kids who are deemed low-level readers are typically given the least amount of time for book reading. It is not okay for schools to be teaching reading in a way that tends to turn kids off to reading. Of course, teachers can try to make fun activities with any content, but that doesn't change the fact that letters, sounds, syllables, and individual words hold little inherent meaning. All kids deserve to be in schools where learning is meaningful and engaging. All kids deserve to be active participants in their own learning. It's not only about raising kids' test scores, it's about raising a generation of kids who love to read. Let's set them on a course for a lifetime of opening their minds through the world of books.